Wonderful, thank you. So welcome everybody to this fifth public webinar from the National Consortium for Societal Resilience. It's a great pleasure to invite Jenny Moreno to come and talk with us today. Jenny works at the University of Concepcion in Chile, and a number of us on this webinar have been working with Jenny a couple of years ago, watching and with great interest some of the work that they were doing in Chile around spontaneous volunteering. And so David Powell and Nicola Dawson and others went across to Chile to find out about some of the excellent work that they're doing. And so it's really great to have Jenny come and talk with us about that work and share some of the lessons around building a spontaneous volunteers programme from a national perspective. For those of you who haven't participated in the NCSR activities before, just a little bit of introduction to those. The consortium is a group of very interested people around whole of society resilience. We cover around 97% of the UK population through the local resilience forums, the emergency preparedness groups, the regional resilience partnerships, through that we have from the 4 nations of the UK, including the Crown dependencies of Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, the voluntary sector, business sector, government sector, all participating to focus on whole of society resilience, with a view of understanding what that means for individuals, for households, for community groups, for businesses, for organisations, and starting to think about what that means for the UK Plus, starting to develop some tools on how can we improve and further work on whole of society approach to resilience. So as part of this, we've been conducting a series of webinars. We've been to the US, Canada, now we're into Chile, we were in New Zealand last time. And so without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jenny. Jenny's going to talk about some of the excellent work she's been doing. Nicola Dawson from Somerset is going to lead the Q&A session for us. And Becky is going to lead the small wrap up at the very end if Becky's online. If not, then we'll sort something out for that. So Jenny, if you'd like to share any slides, and I think I understand you're going to make your slides available after this session.
Can you see my slide?
I can. Yeah, that's perfect. And we can hear you as well.
Okay, that's great. So, should I start?
Please.
Okay.
No, to be honest, I've just
Could I remind people to go on mute, please, if they are not, if you're not Jenny at the moment? Thank you very much. Go for it, Jenny.
Okay, thank you very much, Duncan. Hello, everyone. Well, today I'm going to present some experiences on spontaneous volunteering in Chile and Argentina, and how we were able to build community resilience, focusing on those aspects. Chile is one of the longest and narrowed country around in the world. It's located in the south area of Chile. But unfortunately, it's very famous because it's one of the most prone earthquake country in the world. We had the record of having the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in the history of the humanity. This happened in Valdivia, in the south of Chile, and its magnitude was 9.5. This earthquake also led to a big tsunami, which destroyed thousands of coastal towns. After that, in 2010, we had also another big earthquake. This is the area actually where I live, in Concepcion, in the south area of Chile. These images are from Talcahuano city. This is the area where I'm going to focus today as well, which was also destroyed by a big tsunami afterwards. Fortunately, after 10 years, all the city was reconstructed. And so many lessons also we learned from this disaster. But we don't have only earthquake, we also have many other disasters, including tornado, and during the summer, right now it's summer in Chile, we have more than 30 degrees right now, and there are so many forest fires in the center and south area of Chile, which have destroyed several communities as well. At the same time, we have more than 90 active volcanoes, and we have had several volcano eruptions in the last decades. At the same time, during the winter, we also have several floods and landslides. So we can see I'm very lucky to live in Chile and to work on disaster management. It's unfortunately because of all the damage that all these disasters have caused, but also all the lessons that we have learned from those emergencies during the last decade. One of the main phenomena that happen in Chile after any disaster is the phenomenon of spontaneous volunteering. As you can see in those images, in any disaster, many young people, especially, I would say like more than 90% of the volunteers in Chile are young people coming from high school or from university who wants to provide some help, some aid. Medical students, veterinary students, they work on donation center, they also work cleaning the areas affected, rebuilding houses in the community that have been damaged, which is very positive. The disasters are so, the magnitude of the disaster in Chile is so high that in most cases, the emergency institution, the government, is not able to cope or to deal with the consequences of the disaster using its own resources. So they need a volunteer force, which is, of course, very, very positive because it helps to build the solidarity, community resilience. People are very used to see many volunteers in any disaster. But on the other hand, as we can see in those images, we didn't have a management system to avoid the risks that spontaneous volunteers could have when they are not prepared to deal with disaster. These pictures are from the 2017 wildfire in the south area of Chile, in which you can see young people without the proper protective equipment trying to battle the fires. It caused a big problem for emergency organization, for first responder who could not actually help the victims that were affected by the disaster because they were trying to manage those spontaneous volunteers who were putting their lives at risk. So with this scenario, and we also with the help of a UK project with the University of Manchester, and we started implementing the ISO 22319 on a spontaneous volunteer, and we decided to work on developing the first guideline on a spontaneous volunteer in Chile, which could help local government to deal with this issue. So during 2018 and 2019, we established a working group from different local government, civil society organizations, university, emergency organizations, who gather in order to develop this guideline in the Concepción province. So this was a local initiative that started in the south area of Chile. At the beginning, we didn't have the support from the national government. So we developed this guideline, we published this guideline, and because of the success of this guideline, then the national government, through the National Institute of Young People, the INJU, also developed a national framework on spontaneous volunteers. However, in Chile, we always say that we develop several guidelines, several manuals and law, but we never apply them This is the main criticism that happened for policymakers. So in this working group, we decided to actually prove in any disaster that could happen after the publishing this guideline, to see if this guideline could work to prevent some damage in the community, if it could reduce the volunteer who can end up injured after a disaster. And we had the opportunity to do it in Valparaiso. So this is Valparaiso. This is a port city. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This city has several hills and many informal settlements. So every year there is a fire actually in Valparaiso, which is very, very common. In 2019, we had a big fire during Christmas Eve. This was unfortunately in Valparaiso. And with this National Institute in Hope, we decided to test these national and local guidelines and to manage spontaneous volunteers. So many young people arrived to the affected area, and they were provided by special protective equipment, with sun cream, with some safety guidelines. Also, they got vaccination in order to avoid any kind of injury or illness. As you can see, also there were veterinary students who were helping the pets of the victim that were injured also in this disaster. So before the government arrived with this system of managing spontaneous volunteer, there were some stats that said that there were about 300 volunteers who were injured, and 2 of them had high blood pressure. There were cases of asthmatics. And then the local government in Valparaiso started collaborating with other organizations, civil society organizations. There were actually other local government who were very close by, who arrived to the disaster area and provided different resources. And also they were helping to deal and to coordinate the volunteers. And the positive result was actually very good, because in 3 days of management, the number of injured volunteers fell by 98%. They were provided with different safety measures, as I said before, PPE, also insurance. Most of the volunteers in Chile didn't have insurance before. They were going to the disaster areas and they were helping. But in Hope, this National Institute decided to provide some insurance to those volunteers who were helping there. But the main lesson also was that it's not very expensive actually to deal and to manage volunteers. This was the major concern before developing the guidelines. We talked with different policy makers, with different local government and national government, and all of them said it's very difficult to manage volunteers. We don't have resources, we don't have money to do that. But after experiencing this Valparaiso wildfire, we understood that actually it's not necessary to have so much money. We just need coordination. The coordination among different institutions, organizations, public, private institutions, for example, another local government close to Valparaiso, Limache, provided a bus, transport for volunteers. Also, local people started cooking for the volunteers as well. Health centers also provided some health measures to volunteers, for example, the tetanus vaccination, also dealing with those volunteers who were asthmatics as well. And local community leaders also were essential, because the area affected was so widespread, and there were so many hills who were very far away that they needed different points to set up a as VRC, Volunteer Reception Center. So coordination was essential. And all, for example, and all the masks and all the protective system was provided by volunteer, actually, by local company, by other organization or the municipality. So it was key, this management and this coordination. And the second opportunity that we had to test this guideline, well, Valparaiso wildfire happened during the summer, and during the winter we had for the first time in Chile a big tornado that affected Talcahuano, the same city that I showed you at the beginning that was affected by tsunami. In 2019 was affected by the big tornado that destroyed several houses. Duncan, Nicola, David had the opportunity also to see the damage because they were visiting Chile at the same time at that time. And this was also an opportunity to test this guideline. After, I would say, 20 or 30 minutes of the disaster, young volunteers gathered at the city hall, at the main entrance of the city hall, and came from different universities, and they wanted to help. The problem was that all those volunteers were coming from other cities. They were not from Talcahuano. And Talcahuano is a very big city. There are hills, there are coast area, and it's very difficult, even for me, that I'm from close to Talcahuano. So the municipality provided bus transportation. Also, the municipality gave them some personal protective equipment to those volunteers. And a volunteer reception center also was established at the municipality. They were provided some briefing, especially how to deal with the psychological damage of the people, because the tornado affected one area that in 2010 was affected by a tsunami, and there were many elderly people actually. So it was very difficult to deal again with a second disaster in the same place. So volunteers needed to have some basic skill on how to deal with this psychological damage. So approximately 200 volunteers arrived. They were given a quick briefing about the disaster. They were provided with transportation, and because many elderly people were affected, they helped those people in doing the cleanup in the houses, also packing boxes with food, with some construction material. There were also volunteers repairing the roof, the window, to temporarily sealing the windows because it was very cold, it was winter. People didn't want to leave their houses because they were afraid about someone might stole their things. And also, a good thing about working with young people was using the IT. All the knowledge that young people have about technology, and young people were downloaded a GPS app in order to assess the damage of the tornado, because the route of the tornado was very difficult to follow, because there were several houses that were affected but from different places. It's not like an earthquake or a forest fire where you can see specifically where is the damage. The tornado is very, very difficult. So with those volunteers, were going and walking in the street, and just with this GPS, they were assessing the damage, and this provided the information to the municipality of the houses affected in order to then provide the help that the people needed. But again, the support of the local government was necessary here, because the mayor of Talcahuano He was very happy with the work that we were doing, developing this guideline on spontaneous volunteer. So he decided to support this BRC in Talcahuano. Also, for the first time, they incorporated this mental health briefing, not only to help the volunteer, but also to help the people who were affected there. There were many volunteer organizations that also arrived to the disaster area, and we realized that it was necessary to have that coordination among these different institutions, different organizations, because as I said before, there were many organizations who were not from Talcahuano, who didn't know the area, but they needed to coordinate in order to don't repeat the same volunteer activities, because the next day some volunteers were telling us that they were going to the houses where actually volunteers were already there and who didn't register at the city hall. So it was necessary to be in the field as well, to evaluate, to supervise all the tasks that the spontaneous volunteers were doing. So those lessons were very useful to developing a national framework on volunteering, emergency volunteer, on spontaneous volunteers. So this is the model of INHUB. This is a National Institute for Young People in Chile, because this is the profile of volunteering that we have, which is called Transforma País program, in which the youth are the protagonists of change. So this is the motto of this program. And it encompasses three main areas. The first one is networking. It's necessary to promote community resilience and volunteer activity from the local government, from local community, and then to the regional and to the national level. Use this local capability. And this made more sense when the pandemic happened, when the COVID happened, because INHUB and all the local government, we couldn't travel from one city to another. It was forbidden because of the political measure that we had. So we had to rely on the local volunteer. The second one is about action. It's about setting this volunteer activity in the main, in the SDG goals, in order to promote these goals and also to promote a better emergency management system in Chile as well, not only global, but also national, at the national level. And another need was about learning, the learning experience. Before, so many volunteers were just going, helping, but without some previous knowledge. It was necessary to have some previous knowledge about how to deal with emergency. But this needed to happen permanently, not only after a disaster. So they developed a permanent training, it's an online system training, in order to provide better help to this community affected. So this system, this volunteering system, a spontaneous volunteer, has also other components, the local, the regional, the national level, connect each other by having permanent volunteer teams in all regions. So if there is one region that is affected by a disaster, there are many volunteers who can also come from other regions to help. So there is a connection. And there are, during the year, not only volunteer program when there is a disaster, but also there are some volunteer programs to help some vulnerable people during the summer, especially when the students are in holidays. All those volunteers go to some informal settlement, they build temporary houses, and they do activity, for example, for children. And this is very useful because they keep constantly the volunteer activity. So if there is a disaster, already the volunteer have the training that they had before. Networking is essential because we don't have, and this is the main complaint of all the people, if you come to Chile, many emergency officers will tell you there is no money to do or to implement programs or the different activities. So networking is essential between the university, academia, between the private sector, public sector, and civil society organization. Because in the two cases that I showed you before, Talcahuano, tornado, the wildfire in Valparaiso, the coordination and the networking was essential to implement this management system, to reduce the risk of spontaneous volunteers, and to provide better aid to the community affected. And also during the pandemic, an online volunteering platform was available because before it was actually a very few young people who could access to those training. But after that, this online volunteer platform was public, so any young people or any person in Chile could see this platform and see the different training opportunity or the different activities, volunteering activities that they could do in their own region or cities. So the volunteer management process has 4 stages that has been successfully proved in different disasters. The first one is the risk assessment. So to risk assess the disaster zone to see if it's safe to send volunteers. But this has to be done with the National Emergency Organization, which currently is ONEMI. This has to be done in connection with them and with the local government. The second one is to establish a volunteer reception center in order to register volunteer, to do the briefing, and to supervise the skill of the volunteers. The coordination as well with the different local networks, including local government, civil society organization, and local volunteers. And the fourth is the delivery of PPE and permanent training to volunteers. So this happened in each, we have in Chile 16 regions. So this process works in all of the region of Chile through the INHUB regional offices. So some example before the implementation of the guideline about how the volunteer help was in the 2012 forest fire in Torres del Paine. This is a very famous national park where the volunteers were helping to plant new native trees, to clean up the area affected. Then in 2014, the Great Fire of Valparaiso as well. Then in Atacama, this is in the north of Chile, we have a beautiful Atacama Desert in the north of Chile, which is also very famous. We had floods and volunteers were helping them. Then in 2017, we have also this mega fire where volunteers were also helping. And during the pandemic, we had floods and landslide in San Jose de Maipo, which is very close to Santiago, the capital city of Chile, where again, INHUB mobilized several volunteers, all with the protective measure due to COVID, and they provided the help to the people affected. So during COVID, everything was done online. They did regional volunteer initiative because, as I said before, because of the travel restriction, there were several volunteers who registered in this online platform in order to provide help in their local community, like some recreation activity, providing face masks for health workers, to have some activity for, like, for example, portable scenes to show, to educate the community in this safety measure for COVID. They have this Yo Te Ayudo program in which 315 young volunteers nationwide help more than 2,000 elderly people to provide food, to buy some medicine, and to do any kind of online activity that they needed as well. And training and development was also essential. They developed several guidelines based on this local guideline on a spontaneous volunteer, following the ISO 22319 in order to support the volunteers who were helping during the pandemic. At the same time, we work with Argentina, but the main difference of working with Argentina was that we had the support from the beginning of the national government. The Ministry of Security was supporting the spontaneous volunteer work from the beginning. They developed a national guideline and then a local guideline on a spontaneous volunteer in Neuquén. This is a city located in the south area of Argentina, who also had the opportunity to test this guideline in several disasters. Neuquén, as well as Argentina, as well as Chile, has several disasters because we share the Los Andes mountain, which is very beautiful, but it has so many volcanoes. So Argentina, the same as in Chile, had many volcano eruptions. All the ashes, if there is a volcano eruption in Argentina, come to Chile, and vice versa. Forest fire, flood, snowstorms, and also the COVID, in which Neuquén government had the opportunity to also implement this guideline to establish a volunteer reception center. And the key lesson here was using the local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge of people, because Neuquén is located in the Patagonia, so there are people who live very isolated, where there is no public transport, where they live in the mountain. So using local resources, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge was essential to actually guide the volunteer and the emergency responder as well. So during the pandemic, more than 1,700 spontaneous volunteers provided different support to vulnerable people, and also the coordination between the different provinces in Neuquén was essential as well. Because, for example, if there is a fire or a snowstorm, so there are some rescue teams who come also from other provinces who share the same geography and also the same disaster. So this cooperation was also essential. Neuquén has also the particularity that they have a legal framework, because Argentina is a federal government, so Neuquén decided to have a legal framework in order to provide this spontaneous volunteer management system, and they also had an online platform to register safely a spontaneous volunteer who wanted to help during the pandemic. All this learning and all this cooperation between Chile and Argentina was very good in order to, because we share similar disasters, we have similar geography. But at the same time, it was very key to coordinate and to learn from other countries. And during all this process, we also did a peer review process in Chile and in Argentina, following the ISO 22392. And here we can see Duncan, David, Nicola, who came to Chile before the pandemic. And we had the opportunity to share experiences and to assess what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, how we can improve the volunteer management system in Chile and in Argentina. It was a very successful process which was very valuable for local people in Chile. There were more than 45 stakeholders from different organizations, national, local government, civil society organizations, who participated with this knowledge exchange. It was the first time that something like this happened in my country, in Chile, and also in Argentina. And it was very useful to gather different actors from different countries. In this case, was the UK, Iceland, Ecuador, Argentina, and Chile, to see how we can improve our own system. And the impact was actually very positive afterwards, because several local government or different civil society organizations met at that in those activities, and they keep collaborating nowadays. We did the same in Argentina, but this was commissioned by the National Ministry of Security, who invited us, with whom we had the opportunity to share all this knowledge and to have different representatives around the country. We have Neuquén, we have Buenos Aires, and different organizations who contributed as well to improve the spontaneous volunteer system. So all those lessons make us think that any initiative coming from local could be successful, as we did it in Chile. We just needed collaboration, we just needed the support of different organizations, but it was much, much more easy to do it if you have the national government support, as happened in Argentina. It was very easy to do that and to implement this guideline. We're still working with Argentina. They are still implementing, they recently did a training on spontaneous volunteers, and they want to keep working on that. So these are the experiences that I wanted to share. Thank you very much, and I will be willing to answer any question that you could have.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was wonderful and lovely to see all the pictures and to see so many examples of disasters and where people have rallied round. I'm not seeing much in the chat at the moment, so while people digest it, can I ask a question first?
Yes.
You talk a lot about young people volunteering. In the United Kingdom, our volunteers tend to be older. Why do you think you have so many young people coming forward in Chile to volunteer? And do they need to be managed in a different way, or would the management structures work for older volunteers as well?
I think because of the political characteristic of Chile. I mean, young people, they actually don't participate much in political parties, even voting. They disagree mainly with politics in Chile, but they find that they can contribute a lot in these informal activities. They don't want to be part of organization or formal organization. They want to be free. This is part of, probably is characteristic of many young people. So, and actually the university play a key role, because in each university in the country, there is actually a volunteer program that mobilize in any disaster, which is actually very good, very good. So I think this is part of the characteristic. We don't have actually many elderly people in Chile helping or contributing. Most people are used to have the young people there. It doesn't mean that we don't have it. We actually do that, but in those images, you just can't see young people mainly because of the cultural characteristic. But then INJU, actually, it's not like they avoid working with people older than 30. Actually, they include them. They are part as well. And all those training are also available for people who are older. Because if we just focus on young people, we won't have a proper or a holistic volunteer system in Chile. We need to include all the people.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. A couple of really good questions have come in the chat from Claire and from Carolyn. They'd like to know a little bit more about the scale of the problem. So how quickly after an incident do you see spontaneous volunteers turn up? And can you give us an idea of how many? Yeah. I know it's in rough terms.
Yeah. Well, I had the experience of the 2010 earthquake and the tornado, because I live in those areas. So I was there, I lived those disasters. So the volunteers turn up, I don't know, after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it's very quickly. And actually they gather, I remember during the 2010 earthquake, they immediately go to the places where they can feel, or they think there might be some help. So in Concepcion, for example, they went to the University of Concepcion, they went to the gym, and very spontaneous, I mean, many spontaneous volunteers, and were there just, and many people were going there to give some donation, clothes, food, and the volunteers were helping. We don't have number, unfortunately, because this is also the complaint that I do, and with the team work that we do in Chile, is like because we don't register volunteers, we don't know how many actually they are. But for example, in Valparaíso, we could see like from some picture taken from helicopter, that there were like lines and hundreds of volunteers.
So you'd say hundreds rather than dozens, perhaps.
Hundreds or thousands. It's just because when the emergency responder told me that they saw so many volunteers that they couldn't cope with them. They couldn't, for example, I remember in 2010 earthquake, they couldn't provide food or accommodation because there were so many volunteers coming from the north, because the earthquake happened in the center, and in the south, there were thousands of volunteers coming from the north to help, but they didn't have any place to provide accommodation and food, and they were asking for food. But even the people affected didn't have food for them. So it was a big issue. Even firefighter had to prevent. They have to tell the firefighter from other places, don't come to the south, because they couldn't provide any support to them, to the volunteers. So it depends on the magnitude of the event, but I would say hundreds and thousands of volunteers.
That's really helpful, thank you. There's a sort of linking in with the sort of how do you manage volunteers. Tim's come up with a good question about organising and coordinating volunteers. He's saying, in less isolated areas, would you prefer the local authorities, the municipalities coordinating the task, or do you think it can just as easily be local charities? Right. So Tim is saying, in less remote areas, should it be the local authorities coordinating, or should it be local charities that do the coordination, or doesn't it matter?
I mean, it doesn't matter, because we don't have many local government wanted to coordinate spontaneous volunteers. The example that I show you are exceptional. In most cases are actually local charity who are there. They are the first who arrive. But I realized that in Talcahuano, the local charities arrive first to the local government. They just arrive first to ask what help they need. But many times local government, they don't have the capacity with dealing with the spontaneous volunteers. So I would suggest that local authorities should do it with local charity to coordinate, as happened in Valparaíso. It was a coordination among everyone. But in Hope, at that time, the national government organization located in Valparaíso was the one coordinating everyone. So it depends who is willing to do that. They should just do it.
I'd be really interested if anybody else has got any comments about who they think should coordinate, and if it matters, and if there's options. We've got another question now from Chris about the universities and colleges where there are volunteer schemes, and Chris is saying, do you have lists and contact details for the colleges and universities, and are they available out of hours?
Yeah, I mean, I could find, from the University of Chile, I know that there are so many, for example, health, for example, students from medicine, from nursing, from vets, they are already organized. they have even some training during the year, and if there is any disaster, they just go, and I know them, so I can provide with those details. And also at the University of Concepcion as well, we have some volunteer system inside of the university. Actually, the university is I would say in Chile, is the best place because to do these activities. The university in Chile is very, I mean, of course, it's very important for any family, but for young people, is the place where they can actually develop other activities, such as volunteering. And if the university promote them, it's very good. It's very, very good, because they can provide them with some special protected equipment, with some training, and they coordinate also with the INJU, with the national government. So it's a very good place to find and to recruit volunteers.
So yes, so there's a real, it sounds like there's a real role for colleges and universities in Chile that perhaps doesn't quite operate the same way in England. Now we've got Carolyn Otley coming in with another perspective on the coordination question. Carolyn, do you want to chip in now and sort of share your experience from Cumbria? Because I know you've had a lot of issues, a lot of experience of working with volunteers, spontaneous and otherwise.
Thanks, Nicola. So, I mean, yeah, I think probably echoing Jenny's experience that it doesn't really matter who takes on that coordination role. It tends to be whoever's there first. But I think it's worked well for us when we've been able to link those local charities and community groups into the local authority, because the local authority then gives us the link into the wider coordination structures. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my earlier question about the speed reflects what you've said, Jenny, that those volunteers often turn up there in the first hour and get on with it before anybody else gets a grip.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Carolyn. While we're waiting for some more questions to come through, Jenny, you mentioned volunteer reception centres a few times. Could you describe a little bit how one works and what benefits it brings for those who aren't perhaps familiar with the concept?
So a volunteer reception centre is the place, or not necessarily the place, it could be the place physically, but it's the system that allows volunteers to identify as the system in which they can register, they can give their contact detail, they could receive some brief training, and they can deploy, debrief, and receive some, I don't know, some greetings or congratulate them for their activity. I forgot the word for that. It's just to end up the activity. And so we have different experience of volunteer reception center. We could have it online, as INJU has right now in Neuquén in Argentina. We could do it through I don't know, a physical place, as happened in Talcahuano. They just had a desktop with some chairs and some municipal officers who were registering the volunteers. And we could have it in the field, in the area affected that happened in Valparaíso. And we could have it in different places, because in Valparaíso, it was because there were so many hills affected by the fires that actually was impossible to have one place to register volunteers and to provide PPE. So what Valparaíso did was actually to have a mobile volunteer center. So the municipality provided a vehicle, and with some municipal officers were going to the places where the volunteer working, and they just register them in the field. So there are many ways, and it will depend on the disaster, on the resources that you have, and who is coordinating as well.
That's brilliant. Oh, a couple more questions coming in now. Tell you what, Becca, we'll come back to yours if that's all right. Andrew's asking a question about the app that the young people use to map the impact of disasters. Andrew's asking if the software and platform was provided by the government, or are they using commonly available tools?
No, it was provided because Talcahuano is one of the few municipalities in Chile who has a disaster management office. And there is a geographer there who has developed this GPS app that they use in any disaster. So it wasn't commonly available. So there were, like, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 young volunteers who didn't know what to do, because all the other volunteers were just repairing the window or the roof, and those volunteers were there with their phones. And they received some training, about, I don't know, half an hour training to show them how to use this app. And then they were deployed in the field to assess this damage of the tornado. So it was very simple. I mean, probably for young people, it's very simple to use apps, and the municipality used it, volunteer. It was the first time actually that they used volunteer to do that. And it was very successful.
That sounds like something worth cultivating. Thank you. Changing the subject slightly, Becca is asking, she's saying, it sounds like you have very little problem engaging volunteers, but in the UK, what tools and methods would you encourage to encourage young people and households to get involved in community resilience?
I mean, for all volunteers, actually, it's very positive to have a volunteer experience. I mean, it gives so many satisfaction of doing something, because when you see in the social media showing how people are affected, how their houses were damaged. So I think social media play a key role, social networks, in order to show and to encourage volunteers. Because here we have the social media showing all the damage, but also how many volunteers come and arrive and provide this help. And also to have permanent volunteer programs, because we have so many disasters in Chile. It's very common to do volunteer, but in the UK, probably you don't have as much as we have in Chile. So it could be very convenient to have, for example, permanent program to do something that volunteers that doesn't relate necessarily with disaster. I don't know, to help vulnerable people, to help some children, or to embellish some parks, or to plant some trees. I don't know. This is something that INHOPE does permanently when there is no disaster, and this creates a volunteer culture during the whole year.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, I'd be interested to hear if anybody else who's got an ongoing volunteer engagement program that works. We had high hopes, didn't we, that the COVID mutual aid groups would generate a whole load of volunteers that would keep volunteering. I think we're still seeing that working through the system. There's another question about type of volunteers from Robert. He's saying one slide suggested that the majority of the volunteers were female. Is that actually the case? And if so, why? Any thoughts?
I mean, in the case of Chile, not necessarily. We don't have much, I don't know, data. We are fighting in order to have more data about who are the volunteers who arrive. What age. We know that they are young people, but it would be very useful to know which specific age and also gender. But I don't know, in Chile it's both male, female. I don't know, probably it depends. I don't know, probably women are more keen to help, because there are so many actually communities that are affected where there are some children, women affected by this disaster. So probably a female feel more keen just to help in that scenario. But I don't know. I think we have this. I mean, it's both. It's both in Chile. I would say something that I forgot, that is, I've seen it, and young people have also told me about that the volunteer activity, it doesn't have to be necessarily very, I don't know, sad or boring. They make this activity, I don't know, they could be fun for them. They said they were helping, and actually this is something very good for mental health. They do some extra activity during the volunteer in order to keep themselves with the mood, with a positive mood. They do some recreational activity, and it's actually a very good opportunity to meet other young people. So many young people are just isolated, they don't have many friends, so it's a very good opportunity to meet other people as well. So that's the reason, probably in Chile, we just have both. I mean, male, female, working as a volunteer.
Thank you. And that's actually your mention of mental health and well-being has prompted another question. Could you give any more information about the mental health debriefing given to spontaneous volunteers and who provides it?
Yes, I mean, the municipality, and there are many civil society organizations who are now, I mean, since 2018, doing some online or physical training or face-to-face training on how to provide first psychological aid. So they provide this training to community leaders. They also do it some specific training during the year, even at the university. And they use this international framework of the World Health Organization, about how to provide first psychological aid for first responder. So people are used to that, to this mental health debriefing. And at that time in Talcahuano, it was a charity, a local charity, who did this debriefing about it.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I know that's something that the emergency services in the United Kingdom always think about. Interesting question from Tim. Tim, are you happy to ask your question out loud to everybody?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I just wondered, is there a difference between for extended incidents where you have spontaneous volunteers, as people are saying, you've got those initial first few hours where people can volunteer, and then you've got incidents that can last for days, a week, whatever, and those people who then volunteer later into the process. When you've got more chance to breathe later on in the process, can you is the process different so that you will be starting to have more rotas for staff, for volunteers? So it could be, say, like a 4-hour shift that somebody does, try and make it a bit more regulated. Is it different initially when you have that first rush where you'll just have people doing longer shifts and that kind of thing?
Yeah. This is the main gap, I think, of volunteering in Chile. We have thousands of volunteers helping the first hours, the first day, but then the disaster just disappeared in the social media, and the volunteer just stop helping. I haven't seen a continuous program on a spontaneous volunteer during the recovery, and there are spontaneous volunteers and young people still helping, but they are fewer than the first stage of the disaster, which is something, and this is a big gap, because in the reconstruction and the recovery is where we need more help of volunteers. And this is also about something cultural, because social media play a key role here, but also about the local organization, how we can organize. And both in Valparaíso and in Talcahuano, the example that I show you was just only at the beginning and the first day, the first weeks, but after that, they didn't continue the spontaneous volunteer management process, and they should do it. They know it, but they didn't have the capacity. They had to deal with other things during the emergency. This is the answer. But it has to be done, because when we understand a disaster, this is a cycle. We should have the volunteer trained before, to do some ongoing volunteer training during the year, during the disaster, and after the disaster. And I think we have a big gap during the recovery because we don't have that information.
That's brilliant. I think we've probably got only a couple of minutes left for questions. Paul, you've put your camera on. Did you want to ask a direct question, or did you just put your camera on? No, that's okay.
No, sorry, I just arrived. I was late.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I thought you might be wanting
apologize.
to ask. I thought you might have wanted to come in with a particular question on that last one. No worries at all. Right, I think we've covered off the main questions in the chat. So I'll just ask anyone else if there's anything else they want to ask Jenny, or any general comments that anybody wants to make based on what we've heard. I'll see if anything pops up. No, I think people have said what they wanted to say. I know some people have had to pop off at the end of the day. Thank you very much, Jenny, for answering all of those questions for everybody. I'm going to hand back over to Duncan now for a spot of summing up. I think that's what you said you'd do, Duncan.
Indeed. Thank you, Nicola. I always envy the people who have got to do the summing up, because they've got to take such a lot of information and try to pull it together in such a short period of time. And it's such a difficult task. So I'm not even going to try and do that. What I'm going to do is pick out just some of the sort of the headlines I think that Jenny's covered. A few of the things that I heard Jenny say was it's not costly. It requires a bit of coordination. So it doesn't require money to do new activities necessarily, at least in the Chile and Argentina experience, but it does take time to do the networking between public, private, civil society and academia and those organisations. But I think, Jenny, on one of your slides, I saw 1,700 SVs in Neuquén, and so the rewards are there if that's something that can be done. Another thing I heard was youth as a positive protagonist for change, and I really like that phrase. I've heard it before, and I think it suggests that our young people are not just young people. They're there to be able to have a very positive influence on our future. And you've talked, Jenny, a lot about students coming from different universities, congregating at universities, and then coming to the site of where support is needed. But young people might not want to be part of a formal organisation, and so spontaneous volunteering is something that might be really appropriate for them. So they're not part of that larger formal body, but they can turn up when they want to, and they can provide some support. You know, there is potentially a role in the UK for universities to be even more involved, providing a coordination function around spontaneous volunteers. And it's certainly something that we're actively beginning to do within the University of Manchester, is thinking about how can we do that. You also mentioned about young people doing things like downloading GPS apps and photographing damage. And I remember when we were there, Nicola, David and myself, we were watching the feeds come in of the damage from the tornado and providing that intelligence into the municipality so that they could begin to understand different places across the city of where damage was created, and they were able to deploy from there. One thing, Jenny, you said quite a lot about was linking into wider goals. So you talked about linking into the UN's SDGs. You talked about linking into mayors and their agendas, into national government and their agendas. So it's not only about the agenda that was going on within Concepcion or within Neuquén, it was about linking out to those wider agendas and working with national or other partners to bring together the whole system so that they could get involved. Something else you talked about was volunteer reception centres. And I remember it was the first time that we started thinking about gazebos in the field as being the place where these spontaneous volunteers could meet. So rather than having a government building, I think in Conception's case, it was 45 minutes away from the disaster, and then people were congregating there and then being bussed, we were talking about gazebos popping up at the site of an emergency where the volunteers are already working, and providing those volunteers with a little bit of coordination, a bit of structure. And it doesn't matter who takes that coordination role, but it just matters that there's somebody there who's being able to provide support, providing that coordination. I think I'm going to stop there, or else I'm going to go through all of your presentation. But Jenny, before I move on to sort of close things formally, is there anything that you wanted to add that you might want to remind us of?
No, thank you very much for the invitation. It's actually always a pleasure to share with you this webinar, and also to hear some experience that you were sharing about how you manage spontaneous volunteering in the UK. I know some good experience in Somerset, Cumbria also. It's actually very positive to learn from each other. And in Chile, we did that. I mean, when Nicola came, when you came to Chile, just to learn how you do it in other countries, actually very helpful. Even we have different culture, we are different people, but when we share this knowledge, I think it's great. And by saying that, if you just need any kind of information, or I would share my slide, or I don't know how we do it in Chile or at the university, just contact me. You will have my email address, and I will be happy to provide you with this information.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be people getting in touch. So just to to thank Jenny so much for doing a fantastic presentation. It's never easy trying to bring together a number of years of work into a very short period of time. Thank you so much to Nicola for bringing together the questions so ably and structuring this conversation. Just to do a couple of shout outs. Tomorrow we're going to be sharing the NCSR definition of whole of society resilience. So that's something that we've been working on within the consortium as just a way of beginning to structure what we think whole of society resilience might mean for NCSR members. So that will be available in the Manchester briefing, and it will be coming out tomorrow, as I say. You're welcome to follow us on the website, on LinkedIn, and we share all the upcoming webinars and any of the information that comes out from the consortium. We share that through that. So it's been great having Jenny come and talk about the work from spontaneous volunteers in Chile. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I wish you a good evening. And to Jenny, I think you start your summer holidays tomorrow, so have a great summer holiday. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.